Hello, my name is Corey Engerlot, the author of Slavery Gone for Good. This is a book that I wrote. In this video, I want to share with you questions about this very novel. Now, if you don't know about this book, why did I write this book? I wrote it because I care about our world. I think that a lot of our freedoms are going away. I see that a lot of people don't know how to define those concepts. So one of the big things I always say, one of the three questions I always ask people is, what is slavery? How do you create slavery, right? What is freedom? How do you define slavery so you can define freedom? This book goes into all of that. And if you want to know more about this book, I encourage you to check out my trailer, my video about this book, so you can see if you want to pick it up for yourself. But in other words, we're going to go over questions about this book. So maybe you read this book before, maybe you're still new to it and you're just questioning some extra things like, is this about this book? Or maybe you have questions that I'm not going to cover in this video. That's okay. You can leave it in the comment section below. Maybe you're curious about some of the themes in it, if it's worth buying, if there's other methods of learning. I have an audio book and I also have it in Kindle form. So it should be pretty suitable for most people. And I tried to make it really simple and small. You can see, right? It's a very thin book. I did this because this book is intentionally created to be for teachers, not just people to learn about slavery, but for people to teach about it, for people to share it with others, for it to be easily assimilated into the minds of the masses. And that is what exactly this book goes into. But not just that, but the action steps, which so many people forget, or so many people do not apply. Maybe they know what to do. They know what slavery is. And maybe they just need to get a firmer grasp on it. Well, this book puts it into all that perspective. So you can get a firm ground and say, now I'm going to stand my ground. Now I'm going to stand for my freedoms. This is where the line is drawn before tyranny gets worse. This is where the line is drawn. So that way I know when I could free myself away from the slave masters, because maybe you recognize that there's slavery present, then you're contributing to some forms of slavery. I make some really big statements like that, right? Especially if you're new to this book and you don't know what's in it. And I want you to have an open mind, because this is talking about something that has existed for thousands of years. We can't expect it to just go away at once. You can actually see that there's a whole description about what this book is on the back. Here you can see there's a flag, which is no union with slavery, because as humanity, we can't unite if we don't know what really unites us, and that is sharing our humanity, and knowing that one human being, they own themselves, they have the claim, the right to themselves, and that another human being should not claim to own that individual, or then hence own their rights, right? Or to claim ownership over their property and hence claim ownership over them. We need to evaluate what those things are. And if you're completely new to these concepts, then this is the perfect book for you. Now, aside from all the advertising now, let's go into some questions that I wrote down that I figured, people might ask about, some questions people already asked me about. Why did I write a book? Well, I wrote a book because, like I said, I wanted to make a format that would be shareable with other people, so they can say, hey, I read this book, check it out, this tells you everything you need to know. Instead of looking at a video which might tell you everything you need to know about certain topics, this goes into slavery, sure, but slavery to me is the root to everything. And so when we share this with others, I think it does a great deal of interest into topics that a lot of people have not explored before. Not just natural law, not just natural rights, but natural freedom, natural morality, looking at things not just always politically, and then looking at the dozens of quotes I have in here from abolitionists in their own words and what they did to end chattel slavery. Because that was an action, right? How do you go against the world when everybody's promoting slavery? How do you all of a sudden just say, well, okay, we're going to free the slaves, and it's a trade and it's a practice that everybody promotes and works for the entire economy. How are we just going to get rid of this thing? I mean, it's a hard thing. There were people debating about the Constitution, about immediatism and gradualism. I'm aware of all of that, right? And I try to put it in really simple terms for the everyday person in this book. So One of the other questions is, what about the other types of slavery? Well, if you're curious about other forms of slavery, because I go into this book talking about the two which I see as at the root to all forms, which is mental and physical slavery. If you're curious about like education slavery, job slavery, right, economic slavery, etc., those still can be into those two forms. I have a whole separate video talking about all the types and forms of slavery. I recommend checking that out if you're curious. Now, another question that people might ask is, well, what about animal slavery, right? Animal slavery is this thing that exists in today's world where we think we can just use animals for our benefit as much as we like as human beings. And, the thing I have to say to this is that, like everything, we have to create a world that is integral, where everything is working together, where natures are complementary to other natures. They're not supplementary, meaning other people's natures are ruling over others and gets to dictate their lives when we're all living, right? And I would consider plants to be just as important as animals because, well, the animals need the plants, and especially if we're looking in the case of cattle, we feed them a lot of genetically modified foods. We put them in these polluted areas and mass agriculture. Of course, that's really bad. But the point is that the reason why I don't go into animal slavery in this book is because it's just going over what slavery is by definition. It's just looking at those concepts for what they are in nature. Okay, so then you can base what you want from that based on the definitions, right? You can expand upon what's in this book, but this is going to give the general ground for human action, for what humans need to do to free themselves first before they can free, the whole world and make the world a better place in general. They need to have the ability to do that, and that requires freedom. They can't have the ability to save the world from all the different catastrophes. You can just name the whole list. Without being free to begin with, right? You can look into Tesla and free energy, and even the environment and what's going to happen to the environment. The environment's a slave to mankind, and mankind imposes their will upon the environment. There's many things, but they're all integral, and they all work together. The point is that if we're enslaved, and we're enslaving ourselves, our own species, there's something wrong with ourselves. And first we need to know ourselves before we start helping others. We need to gather respect for ourselves, care for our own bodies, before we can say, that we need to take care of other people's bodies. It's about drawing in the truth toward ourselves, understand the truth within ourselves so we can understand the world even better, and bring that knowledge to other people. Say that you've had experience and awareness and you've come to understand what freedom is for yourself so that way you can share it with others. So how about the history of the Anunnaki? This is another question that people might ask. Well, the Anunnaki, this story I'm quite aware of, right? And this is one that a lot of people might say, well, it's a myth or it's legend, it's just history. Maybe, some people say, well, yeah, it could be true, this or that. I'm not here to debate what is true, what isn't true, and what I want you to believe and not to believe. I didn't live at that time. Again, I'm looking at a universal nature for ideas that require reason to understand. So, when it comes to history, well, you're kind of just taking it on faith. Like, yeah, okay, this thing happened in history, and okay, it can teach us some stories, and maybe it can make sense because it teaches us how we came to be, etc. I give great credence into those stories, in those ancient accounts. I think we should definitely look into them. That being said, why not look at the very nature of slavery itself if it is a wrong thing? Why not look at the very action of slavery, not just the condition of slavery? And that, to me, I think is hitting at the root cause of the scenario. Because then it doesn't require any faith of saying, well, yeah, this happened in history, this is what happened, they made people slaves, and thus the slave species was formed. I have a section in the book talking about the history of slavery, a little brief history, and it talks about the Sumerians. It goes as far back as them, which they have a strong tie to the Anunnaki, so I think that kind of fulfills this question, but I know that some people are going to be like, well, I want to hear more about the Anunnaki. You need to go into detail. And listen, I don't think it's going to be helpful for the everyday person, because especially if it's just going to cause a whole bunch of debates where I don't think the debate should go. I think the debate should really go where our freedoms lie, what our freedoms are, what slavery is. And then every time people try to distract away from that, they really just don't want to face those things, because those things tend to be the most important things to pay attention to. So, were the abolitionists of the past always right? Because I seem to have a great emphasis on the abolitionists. Like, oh, we're modern abolitionists, and the abolitionists of the past, a lot of them were anarchists, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of them were anti-government, anti-constitution, even, because they saw it was upholding slavery, and therefore, they should denounce all forms of human authority, since slavery is basically claiming human authority over other humans when that slave is free by God or nature, God's government, as they would say, as it says in this book, Radical Abolitionism. It goes over many of their stories, and within pretty much more than half of this book being quotes from abolitionists talking about those very ideas, I think it's really important that the things that they said were often very right. I don't know everything exactly that they did. I know a lot of what they were involved with and a lot of the groups and different ideologies. It's quite surprising. A lot of things that people can learn from, not just from like the Founding Fathers time period, but after, where slavery was ended. And you can say the Founding Fathers played a role in that. I have a whole video about the Founding Fathers. I suggest you check that out as well. But the abolitionists were certainly right in many degrees that we still need to understand today, because, well, they successfully committed action, and they did it without politics. So that's a huge thing, because most people think in today's world that you have to change things through politics, and that's just simply untrue, and if anything, counterintuitive to what actually should be done. So I hope that answers that question. What about Aristotle's natural slavery argument? Now, this is a really good question, because I think it tells us a great deal about our world, and Aristotle, I think, was very much right on so many different things. And great wisdom. Of course, a lot of philosophers. All the philosophers provide something of an essential use of perspective. I think the further we go down history, the more we start to cloud out our understanding of these former ideas, like the ones from Aristotle, which was held so greatly back then. But Aristotle, he had a lot of great ideas. One of his theories, though, about slavery was that there's a difference between natural and unnatural slavery. Now, throughout my works, I make a big distinction always between the natural and the unnatural. So for him to pose that there's a form of natural slavery versus unnatural slavery, what is he talking about? So if you look into it, he says a natural slave is somebody who is not forced to be a slave. There's somebody who doesn't have the reason capability to be free and therefore deserves to be a slave. So he's essentially saying, well, their natures are not intact, so therefore they can naturally be a slave. And the other way around would be unnatural slavery, where they're forced to be a slave when they can be free, and if they are to be free, then why should they be a slave? It's unnatural for their condition. It's a very interesting argument, because basically what he's saying is that in order to not be a slave, you need to have knowledge, you need to free yourself, which is exactly the same message I'm saying, but I'm not giving any credence at all to slavery being natural, and the reason why is because it shouldn't be permitted. I don't think any human being should just live their lives saying, well, I'm not going to reason, I'm not going to think for myself, because where's that going to lead you? You're going to do wrong things, you're going to be a slave, and I don't think people are meant to be slaves. I think people are supposed to be empowered. They're supposed to have that power. It is in their nature. I say I think, but I know because it is in their nature to reason. So when they suppress that or they give that away, in the case of slavery, they're not utilizing their own nature, right? It's not empowerment. It's, if anything, degrading themselves, and I don't think that is actually good. Do you think that's good? So his natural slavery argument, I understand it, but it doesn't validate, and that's why it got eradicated in the 1800s, chattel slavery, because people saw it as morally wrong. They saw no matter what, this individual is a human being just like everybody else. So what makes them any different from the other person? Oh, they have less reason capabilities? Well, then teach them how to read, teach them how to write. The slaves didn't know how to read or write. then they won't need to be slaves anymore. Some of the philosophers of the past were slaves themselves. And, they were philosophies put into place where it's like, well, if the slave works enough and they teach themselves enough, then they could free themselves with the money that they gain. But that just means that by nature, by just being simply born into the world and being born a slave, you require permission from others to be free. That you are not naturally free. That human beings ultimately determine your life, other human beings, but you're not in control of your life. Now, they might justify it through the means of, well, you grow up in the world and then you have to own up to yourself so that way you can prove that you're free. And this still works in other forms today, basically. But the point is that everybody deserves to be free and that everybody can be moral. That there is such a thing as morals, and we're not teaching it in today's world. We're not encouraging people to be moral. If anything, we're encouraging the opposite because we're completely disregarding it or excusing behaviors that are wrong in the case of government when we know them to be wrong, but yet legitimize them through our belief system of statism, what I call mental slavery. Okay? Now, is it slavery if a slave consented? Well, my question to this is, can you opt out at any time? Okay, so if a slave wrote a contract like, yes, I want to be a slave, what makes them think that's a good idea for themselves? Is that really living out their best potential? And then if they want to be a slave, can you opt out at any time? Because then you're not a slave. If you can opt out at any time, well, then it's voluntary. It's not involuntary. It's not coercion. You're not forced into being a slave. You're not a slave. So that is the simple answer to that question. Now, the next question is, why isn't it free, my book? Now, basically, I got a lot of inspiration to write this book based on Larkin Rose's Most Dangerous Superstition book in the sense of the size in comparison with the price. His is about double the size, so double the price. So I was like, okay, I'll just do it under $10. Because I felt like there needed to be some sort of added value to it. And by doing so, I think a lot more people bought it, believe it or not. And they wanted to also support my works. And I will probably be giving it out for free in the future, so look out for that, because trust me, I want this knowledge to get out to as much people as possible. But there has to be advertising programs set in stone, so there is good in adding a value to it, using a modern day currency to represent that knowledge. And I'm not just saying, well, because Larkin Rose did it, I'm going to do it, because his book is free in many different places of the web. It's even on nita.one/advanced, the website that I have. So certainly, it's eventually going to get leaked either way. It's going to end up free no matter what. This is the internet. This is the modern day and age. So I'm not here trying to make a quick buck, because what am I trying to get out of it? It's only like $10, and you don't even make most money on the paperback. You make the most amount of money on the audiobook and the online book, the Kindle, the ebook. You make the most amount of money with that, and you actually make the least amount of money on the hardcover books. It's quite the opposite. But yeah, so I don't really make much money at all. If anything, I'm making not even $1 on each sale, which I'm selling the book for $10. And the reason why is because I have it to expanded distribution, so that way libraries and different places all around the world can have access to it. So I thought about it like that, and by putting it out in the marketplace, it does get out to more people. So that was my logic about that, and hopefully that answers that question. How long did it take me to write the book? Well, it took me about 2 weeks. Now, the reason why it took me about 2 weeks is because I worked on it all day long and all nights long. I literally worked on it for as much as I can because I had so much passion to write it, seeing how important slavery was to me and how important abolitionism was for me. People might ask, well, why is abolitionism? Why did you pick that? It's like, do you look at what the abolitionists said? Do you understand what abolitionism is as a fundamental ideology per se? It's not even an ideology, it's an action. And when you understand that everything that we talk about when it comes to freedom is essentially connected to slavery as the opposite condition, then you can connect today's world into saying, well, if there's tyranny, then there must be slavery. And if there's freedom, then there must be what causes what causes there to be freedom? Well, maybe it's people being in control of themselves, the opposite of slavery. So you can make these connections, and they were so huge to me that I just went through each and every single question, and I put it in ordered fashion. So that way, when you read the book, one question at a time, the dots start to add up. And maybe it's that small type of book to where you have to reread it a couple times to understand it, because it's so simple and to the point. Or you have to go back to previous questions to connect the next question. I think that is the magic of the book, and that's why I created it, and why I had so much passion in writing it, and why it only took me about 2 weeks. And I do write at a professional level because I've been writing so much lately, not just scripts for videos in my past, or writing in my journal, which helped so tremendously, but writing my health book, right, which is a whole different book project, which has over 600 pages already. And doing tons of other writing. I've written flyers and brochures, and collected quotes and made presentations. I've gotten very used to writing to the point where I can write about 1,000+ words each and every single day, which to me is a very good milestone to hit as a writer. Now, how did I create my book? I'm going to have a video about this and sharing with you how I created it, but kdp.amazon.com is a very useful website tool. Now, a lot of people might say, well, why did I use Amazon? It's like, okay, so I independently published. Amazon was just there along the way. I didn't even pay them for anything. In fact, their book service is completely free. If I went with another service, they likely use Amazon's same printers. And they're probably Amazon's biggest customer, like Ingram, for example, which is also a great company for people who want to start up their book. Was thinking about that one, but KDP was pretty nice because it's really simple. You just upload your files and you're done, and it's on the marketplace, and everybody thinks it's like you got to be some special thing to be on Amazon. It's funny because when the first week we released this book, it got to the tens in the political philosophy section on Amazon. So it could have gotten more if I did more advertising that week. I didn't really share about it at all online. So just a tip of advice: if you're going to put out a book, you might want to pump it out really hard when you first release it. But KDP was really helpful. I used a lot of different channels out there that produce video content that share wisdom about creating books, like Kindlepreneur and Self-Publishing School. I think they do a great job. There's a lot of others out there too. If you just do some research, just tons of people that will give you resources. It wasn't that hard after I figured it out. I used LibreOffice to write the book. I used OnlyOffice to do some extra editing, and then I used LibreOffice Draw to convert it into the right format. I used Photoscape X to do the designs. I also used Google Slides to do the designs, which is kind of weird, but I did that anyways. So I used a number of tools, and it took me days just to figure out how to do things, which is why I'm going to have pretty much a video dedicated to how I did things for the book. But why slavery? Why talk about slavery? Again, it's because of the freedom in our world, and I care so much about it. And all my projects are basically going to connect to this one because of how important it is to me, just as much as I connect the ideas to nature, which if you don't think this is about nature as the answer, then you're wrong. Because I'm saying that by our nature, we're meant to be free. We are destined for freedom. We all desire freedom. And so it's understanding that is very integral to nature. It is not where it's not integral to nature. It definitely is integral to nature. To think it isn't is a sign that, well, perhaps you are enslaved mentally, and you think it's okay to be a slave, and maybe you've grown complacent in your slavery, not realizing where you might be contributing to it. This is a big thing, so it's really a book for people who care about the world, and they care about what's going on. If you don't care, then fine. You don't care about slavery, you don't care about freedom, then, so be it. I'm not here to convince you, but I do think it's pretty darn important we check that out, because if you do see the world around you, at least you can hopefully admit that things are going kind of off, kind of strange, kind of confusing. If you could at least admit to the confusion, or the amount of people who are going crazy one way or another doesn't matter what they're thinking. You might even call me crazy. I'm okay with that. But if you can acknowledge that is what the case is, you can say Mark Passio's crazy, he's angry, all these things. If you can just acknowledge that, that's fantastic, right? But then let's understand, why is that? Perhaps it's because we are fed up with the world around us. Perhaps it's because you've created this dynamic where there's people who are fed up and there's people who are complacent. And where could you bridge the gap? Perhaps it is in creating texts like the ones that I've created to help open the minds of people, of all people, and help them find middle ground in perhaps their own human nature. So, my other projects, two others in particular, two other book projects. One of them is the health book, and the other one is a philosophical book per se. And they're both really important to me, particularly the philosophical one. But the slavery book is always going to have a special place in my heart because of how simple it is, and it's meant for the everyday person to teach and share, etc. And there's going to be a lot of book-related content from this channel, so don't expect this to go away anytime soon. I'm going to go over each topic. I'm going to go over so many different things within the book, so even if you don't buy the book for yourself, you're going to get a huge scope of information of stuff that I did put in the books. So definitely look forward to that. The reason why I've become so much of a writer lately, I have no clue, but it's something that I do enjoy and something that allows me to put thoughts in an organized fashion with the words that I want to choose and use in a very special way, because talking in the camera like this, I think it's great. I can put out so much information at once. I can be passionate and I can share that with you. I could share my face to face with you, but it's really also important that I share my expressions on paper, because then I can make it exactly clear what it is I'm trying to say, with really making sure that it's perfect. And in a fashion to where people can look at it for themselves, read it, reflect, and not, pay attention to the video, have to look at it and depend on me for the knowledge, but rather their own reason, their own pace of looking at the words. There's a lot of people who say, "Hey Corey, you speak too fast, you have too much music in your videos," all this stuff, right? And that's okay. That's why I have so many different formats of different things that I've produced. And I will continue to do that because this work matters so much to me. So, if you have any other questions about the book Slavery Gone for Good, please feel free to leave it in the description below. Any questions at all, please share with me. I'd very much appreciate it. And thank you everybody for watching. As usual, thank you for always hanging out, sticking by the channel, and watching my pretty darn long videos, but also my passion and allowing me to share that with you. I hope that you find yours in this crazy world where people, I think, are struggling to find such a thing, and maybe you can share it with them too. Maybe you can share the ideas that I share with you, and we can create a better world. I do have hope. I do have faith. If you do not, well, then you lost it all. And I think it's important that we do hold that. And even if it's just among ourselves, and we share that with each other, it keeps our motive, our spirit going. And it keeps our health good at the same time. So it's very important that you take care of yourself during this time, take care of your family, take care of your mind, and you help take care of other people's minds and give credence into their own minds, their own natures. And maybe you say I'm overly optimistic. Maybe you say I'm overly hopeful. I don't care. I don't care what you think of me. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that change is being done. And if you are doing something about it, I applaud you. Thank you very much. This is Corey at Nature is the Answer.